responsibility did you never ask for? When I was 9 years old, my parents started taking in medically fragile children for the government paycheck, and I became the one who kept them alive while my parents collected $30,000 a month. My parents discovered the foster care gold mine when our neighbor mentioned how much the state paid for special needs placements. Within 6 months, they'd welcomed 3 medically fragile children: Sadie, who needed a ventilator; Caleb, who was deaf; and baby Millie, born without the ability to swallow. The social workers praised my parents for opening their hearts to children no one else wanted. What they didn't see was my parents ordering me to figure out how to manage feeding pumps, suction tracks, and calculate medication dosages. "You're so good at this," Mom would say, watching me struggle with Millie's G-tube at midnight. Natural little nurse. Dad was already calculating how many more children they could fit in the house. By the time I was 11, we had 6 children who required round-the-clock medical care, and I hadn't slept through the night in 2 years. My parents had perfected their system. They attended the meetings, signed the papers, and smiled for the social workers while I did everything else. The children were mine in every way that mattered. Sadie would only calm down when I sang to her. Caleb spelled out "I love you" in sign language every night before bed. Millie smiled her first smile at me, not them. I'd rush home from school to check on them, do homework while monitoring oxygen levels, fall asleep sitting up between their beds in case someone needed me. I kept meticulous notes and composition notebooks, tracking every symptom and dose and output, because these children deserved someone who paid attention, even if that someone was barely a teenager herself. Meanwhile, my parents lived like lottery winners on the money meant for the children's care. They bought new cars, took weekend trips, renovated the kitchen while I made do with expired formula, and recycled medical supplies. When I begged for a real nurse to help, even just for a few hours so I could sleep, Dad laughed. "Why would we pay someone to do what you do for free?" When I was 15, the state announced surprise inspections after another family got caught neglecting their foster children. The night before the inspection, Sadie developed pneumonia. Her oxygen levels dropped dangerously low, and she needed immediate hospital care, but my parents refused to take her. "If she's in the hospital during inspection, they'll think we can't handle her needs," Mom said. I watched Sadie struggle for every breath, her lips turning dusky. I couldn't let her die for their inspection, so I called 911 myself, claiming to be home alone with a sick sister. My parents arrived at the hospital playing the concerned caregivers, but the hospital social worker noted that a 15-year-old had been alone with 6 medically fragile children. The inspection the next day was a disaster. The state worker asked my parents to demonstrate Millie's feeding routine, and they didn't even know where her pump was. The worker interviewed me separately, and I was so exhausted and so worried about Sadie still in the hospital that I just broke. I showed her my notebooks, the medical logs I'd kept, the alarm schedule I'd created to manage 6 children's needs alone. My parents tried damage control, claiming I was a troubled teen making up stories for attention, but the evidence was overwhelming. The state removed all 6 children immediately. I watched them take my babies away while my parents raged about lost income. Sadie reached for me through the ambulance window. Caleb signed, "Where are you going?" as they loaded him in. Within a week, my parents had kicked me out. I was 16, homeless, and missing 6 pieces of my heart who were scattered to different medical foster homes across the state. But I pulled myself up. I got my CNA certification, worked multiple jobs, and hired a lawyer, all because I wanted to be able to see the kids. The judge finally granted me supervised visits, but the meetings broke my heart. Sadie had regressed, no longer responding to our songs. Caleb had forgotten most of his sign language. Millie didn't remember me at all. The other 3 weren't any better off. A year into visits, I got a call. Sadie had been hospitalized with pneumonia her foster parents hadn't caught in time. She was intubated, declining rapidly, making sounds the nurses couldn't understand, but I knew. She was calling for me the only way she could. I drove 3 hours to find Sadie alone in the ICU. The moment I took her hand and sang our song, her oxygen levels improved. The social worker pulled me aside with news that made my knees weak. All 6 children were failing in their separate placements. The state would place all 6 with me if I could meet the requirements within 72 hours. Approved housing with medical modifications, $20,000 in deposits and equipment, proof of stable income. I had none of it. 3 days to accomplish the impossible, or they'd move forward with permanent placements out of state. I sat by Sadie's bed calculating hopeless math. The other 5 were being prepared for transfer. Caleb to Oregon, Millie to a facility in Nevada, the twins to separate homes. My babies were being scattered because poverty was the one disease I couldn't cure with love and sleepless nights. The social worker had given me a deadline. Monday at 5 p.m., the placements would be finalized. It was Friday night. I had 2 business days to become rich enough to deserve the children I'd kept alive since I was 9 years old. And then my lawyer called me. They'd gotten another petition from someone who wanted the kids, my parents. They said I would be an unfit guardian, and they said they had proof. Full story on the channel below.